This is a quick video showing you how to change the spur and pinion gear for a two-wheel drive Traxxas Rustler / Stampede or Bandit. This method works for both XL5 and VXL models. For the XL5, you're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver, the Traxxas 4-way wrench, a 1.5 and 2.5 Allen wrench. For a VXL, you need the Traxxas 4-way wrench, a 1.5, a 2, and a 2.5 Allen wrench. With every model, you're going to want to remove the rear right tire using your Traxxas 4-way wrench. To remove the tire, all you're going to do is hold it still with one hand and turn the nut counterclockwise until it's all the way off. Once the nut is off, then all you have to do is pull the tire away from the RC. The tire should come right off. You can put it underneath your RC for extra support. However, if you have a Bandit, you have to be careful when taking off the tire. There is no wheel hex hub, so the bar that goes inside the axle can easily slide out, and there is a washer that can easily fall off. Be sure not to lose these two parts when removing the rear tire. And like I said, with the Slash, Stampede, and Rustler, there's a wheel hex hub on there, so you don't have to worry about the bar and washer falling off. And now you have full access to the gear cover, which you're going to want to remove. It is held in with two screws, one on top and one on bottom. If it's an XL5, you're going to want to use a Phillips head screwdriver and remove these two screws. If you have a VXL, then you're going to use a 2mm Allen wrench to remove the two screws. Once you remove both screws, set them to the side. Then the gear cover can easily just be pulled off. And finally, you have reached the spur and pinion gear. So in case you've never seen the transmission before, this big gear is going to be the spur gear. The small one is a pinion. The transmission for the Slash, Rustler, Stampede, and Bandit are identical, no matter if it's VXL or XL5. The only difference between the models at this point is that XL5 is going to have Phillips screws that hold the motor onto the transmission, while the VXL will have hex screws that hold the motor onto the transmission. It doesn't matter which gear you're going to be changing. The first step is you're going to be loosening both of the screws that hold the motor to the transmission. You don't want to remove them, you just want them loose enough, that way you can move the pinion gear away from the spur. Between the two gears, changing the spur gear is much easier. You're going to want to use a 2.5mm Allen wrench and remove the three screws that you see located on the spur gear. And this is the same for the XL5 as it is for the VXL. Once you remove the last screw, you're going to want to get a flathead screwdriver, put it behind the spur gear near the top, and pry it off while rotating it. And the gear should easily slide off. Then you're going to get your new spur gear, line it up with the holes, and then just put the three screws back into place and you're done. To remove the pinion gear, there's only one grub screw that holds it onto the motor, and that is when you're going to use your 1.5mm Allen wrench. Turn the grub screw counterclockwise until you are able to pull the pinion gear off the motor. To put on a new pinion gear, you'll notice that there is a flat side to the shaft that comes out of the motor. You're going to want to have the grub screw face that flat side. Then you're going to push the motor against the transmission and you're going to line up the pinion gear so it is perfectly even with the spur gear. Once everything's lined up, all you have to do is tighten the grub screw. I have to warn you, whenever you're changing the pinion gear and you're tightening down the grub screw, be sure not to strip it. You do want this to be as tight as possible. If you want to, you can use some thread locker. But if you ever strip the grub screw, it's going to be very difficult to get it off the motor. And at that point, there's several methods that you can do. However, none of them are really easy. So be careful when you're tightening that grub screw. In fact, I highly prefer that you use a Torx wrench. This one with a star design. I have never stripped a grub screw with one of these. With Allen wrenches, If it's a decent quality Allen wrench, then the chances of you stripping it are pretty low, but still, it's one of those things you always have to be careful about. Once you switched out the gear that you wanted to, it's time to properly mesh up the pinion gear to the spur gear. You don't want to have the two gears too close together, otherwise it could strain the gears and the motor. However, you also don't want to have them too far apart, otherwise you'll strip the spur gear. The key is that you want to have it just loose enough so the spur gear can move just a little bit. Right there is perfect. Hold in that position and tighten it up. If you're not so confident about doing it by eye, Traxxas does have an easier method. What you're going to want to do is tighten these two screws just enough so that motor can barely be moved. You're going to push the pinion gear all the way into the spur gear. Then you're going to get a strip of notebook paper. Don't use computer paper, it's too thick. Then all you're going to do is feed it in between the gears. Make sure that it's pushed up properly and then tighten the two screws. This will give you the proper spacing. Now you can finally reattach the gear cover. The two screws that hold it down are different sizes. One is longer than the other. The longer screw is going to go on top and the shorter one is going to go on bottom. All that's left is to finally reattach the tire. Now you'll see that there is a spot for the hex hub to fit into. Make sure that it lays completely flat before you tighten the nut all the way. With the Bandit, you want to make sure that the washer goes on first, and the pin that goes through the hole in the axle is even on both sides. When you look at the back of the tire, you'll see that there's a perfect little groove for that bar to fit into. So once that lays straight, feel free to tighten down the wheel all the way as much as you can. Once that wheel is on, you are all done. And that is how you change the spur and pinion gear for a two-wheel drive Traxxas Rustler / Stampede and Bandit. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.